Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're looking at an absolute marvel of the 19th century, the Transcontinental Railroad. It's an engineering triumph that literally reshaped physical space, transformed human lives, and, crazily enough, actually changed the clock itself. But as we're going to see, this massive leap forward came with some truly staggering human and societal costs. But before we jump into the history of laying all those tracks, I want you to think about a modern mystery that the railroad actually solved for us. When you glance down at your smartphone and see the time, you trust it completely, right? But how did we all suddenly agree on what time it is everywhere? Well, the answer to that is actually buried in the wild logistics of 19th century train schedules. So, here's our agenda for today. Number 1, the technological feat. Number 2, the immigrant labor force. Number 3, the cost of progress. And number 4, the legacy of time. Starting off with Section 1. The technological feat, connecting the coasts. Think about this for a second. Before these tracks were laid, getting from coast to coast meant a brutal, perilous 4 to 5 month journey packed in a wagon. But after the railroad, that exact same trip was slashed to just 7 days. 7 days! And even crazier, the cost dropped to just 15% of what it used to be. The United States practically shrank overnight, making all those distant places incredibly accessible and totally affordable. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the instant communication of the telegraph actually paved the way for the physical speed of the trains. The Transcontinental Telegraph was finished in 1861, which immediately made the Pony Express completely obsolete. Then, just a year later, in 1862, the Pacific Railroad Act was passed, kicking off this monumental project that wrapped up in 1869. Basically, being able to send messages instantly is what made assembling this giant railroad logistically possible. You can really think of the telegraph as the invisible brain of the railroad. Superintendent Charles Minot over at the New York and Erie Railway was the one who pioneered using it to coordinate passenger trains moving in opposite directions on a single track. So if there was a mechanical failure or a train was running late, dispatchers could just override the schedule immediately. It was absolutely crucial for making sure trains didn't collide and keeping everything running with a level of efficiency no one had ever seen before. Moving to Section 2. The immigrant labor force, the true builders. So while the Union Pacific and Central Pacific companies were in this frantic, high-stakes race to build towards each other, they were relying on entirely different yet equally exploited immigrant workforces, and they were facing drastically different conditions. The Union Pacific, building west, mostly hired Irish immigrants. A lot of them were actually Civil War veterans and paid them $3 a day with their food provided. On the flip side, the Central Pacific was building east and having a terrible time keeping white workers through the grueling Sierra Nevada mountains. So they turned to Chinese immigrants. But these workers were paid less than half of white wages. And on top of that, they had to fend for themselves when it came to meals and bathing. I want you to really picture this for a second. Imagine working in near complete darkness inside Tunnel 6, constantly breathing in this thick mix of black powder and rock dust. The Central Pacific Railroad was foundering. They were completely stuck trying to punch through the Sierra Nevada. To literally save the company, Chinese workers were brought in to break through solid granite. And the granite here was so incredibly hard that they didn't even need timber shoring to prevent the roof from collapsing. Tunnel 6 was 1,659 feet long. The workers were grinding through freezing 12-hour shifts. And even though they were working around the clock, their progress through that central shaft was measured in agonizing inches. We are talking about moving forward just 1 foot per day. The Chinese laborers worked in teams of 3. One guy would hold a flat-bottomed drill bit in the pitch black. His 2 partners would hit it with 8-pound sledgehammers. Bam, bam. Then he'd rotate the bit 90 degrees. Bam, bam, quarter turn. They did this repetitive, wildly dangerous, bone-jarring sequence day and night, 6 days a week for 2 full years. All just to make little holes for black powder and nitroglycerin. 20,000. That's the estimated number of Chinese immigrants who worked on this railway. Many of them were fleeing abject poverty and famine back in their rural home districts, looking for wages that, while highly discriminatory here, were still beyond anything they could imagine back home. But the death toll was staggering. Thousands paid the ultimate price, losing their lives to rock slides, accidental explosions, and just brutal winter avalanches. On to Section 3. The cost of progress, societal consequences. We also have to look at the broader impacts here. The Transcontinental Railroad cut right through the homelands of at least 15 tribal nations, very often before any kind of formal agreements were even in place. This immense environmental and territorial disruption forever altered the long-established cultural practices of indigenous peoples across the West. It brought a massive wave of settlement, severely restricted access to traditional hunting grounds, and supported this widespread, devastating hunting of bison, which obviously had incredibly deep cultural and survival consequences for Native nations. And the immediate aftermath wasn't much better. The celebratory completion of the railroad very quickly spiraled into severe racial tensions. When economic uncertainties hit in the 1870s, Chinese immigrants became heavy scapegoats, and that growing prejudice ultimately culminated in federal law by 1882. Despite their indispensable backbreaking labor that quite literally united the country, the Chinese workforce faced intense prejudice. The Chinese Exclusion Act essentially suspended the immigration of Chinese laborers and forced those already traveling to carry special certificates. It was a direct, targeted legislative action aimed specifically at blocking a single racial group, which ended up sparking boycotts in China and severely straining international relations for decades. Finally, Section 4, the legacy of time, altering reality. So before the railroad, the whole country operated on something called local mean time. Basically, noon in any given town was determined by the exact moment the sun passed directly overhead. That meant noon in your town could be several minutes off from noon in a neighboring town just a few miles down the road. Now, if you're traveling by horse-drawn wagon, that doesn't matter at all. But for trains, moving a mile a minute, it was a total logistical nightmare. 27. That is the downright absurd number of different, official time zones that existed in the state of Illinois alone before standardization. Just imagine trying to catch a train when the station in D.C. says it's noon, but the train arriving from York is running on a schedule where it's 12:12. I mean, it was pure chaos. To fix this, the railroad companies just took matters into their own hands. Without an act of Congress, without asking the president, railroad representatives met up in Chicago and unilaterally ordered the entire nation to sync their clocks. They established the standard time zones we still use today. In fact, Sunday, November 18, 1883 became famously known as the Day with Two Noons, because a bunch of communities celebrated their local solar noon and then literally reset their watches to celebrate the new official railroad noon on that exact same day. So, next time you pull out your smartphone to check the time or set an alarm for the morning, I want you to remember the incredible engineering, the immense human sacrifice in those freezing granite tunnels, and the sheer logistical audacity of railroad tycoons that made that precise little number on your screen possible. It kind of makes you wonder, does our modern world truly run on cutting-edge technology, or are we all just passengers still riding along on a 19th century train schedule?